In today's episode,
an offer you can't refuse.
we're going on a cruise.
Voyaging around Mediterranean Sea.
So get on board.
Our goal was not to sink the ship.
And let's fix some networks.
And even though aesthetics matter, I get it, but wireless is never for life.
1 bar means you're not getting anything good happening, that's for sure.
Exactly. You don't want to see 1 bar, right?
Welcome to Cisco Tech Stories. A podcast with real-life stories from real-life engineers. Your hosts are Nicholas and Tristan.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast, a podcast where we listen to outstanding stories from our guests from all around the world, always about a technical topic, awkward stories, interesting troubleshooting. We're your hosts, Nico and Tristan, technical leaders in EMEA. Hello, Tristan.
Hello, Nico. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. I was thinking, we keep doing, a classical episode, like we interview someone and then we ask for a story. But I was thinking we could do special episodes. And I had in mind about special use cases. In wireless, we have a lot of them, but then, there's other technologies having different ones. We have customers that are plane companies and, having a network on a plane is always something interesting. So we might try to do an episode on that someday. There's boats. There's always very, very interesting. We have the armies, governments using networks, and they have very crazy requirements. So we can talk about the difficulties of that.
Yeah, indeed, that would be super interesting. Like, see how our Cisco products are used in different contexts, see different use cases. That would be cool. And talking about boats, I have some stories as well. Might also have on planes, but boats for sure I do.
Okay, so what kind of interesting troubleshooting do you have on a boat?
Well, it was a bit of a funny one. So, the ferries crossing the English Channel between France and UK, right?
Yes.
Well, it turns out that one day we got a customer calling us saying that they manage the network that is on those ferries, right? On those boats themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And they say that they have a Cisco router with an LTE, so 4G mobile connection on those boats that is needed to transfer some data when it's at the port, either on the UK side or on the French side. And they were complaining that when it's on the foreign side of the sea, so if the SIM card, let's say, was French, when it was on the UK side, they were having barely any connectivity at all. So they couldn't do any of the transactions that they needed, and it was very annoying for them because it was really a mandatory thing, right?
But then if they swap the SIM card with the other country, then it works better.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, you cannot have like somebody at each port swapping the SIM card, right?
Or you can have a dual SIM LTE router.
Yeah, and I believe it was actually, but I think it might be like, of course, you double the cost because you need 2 subscriptions and things like that.
Yeah, and then you need to decide when to fall back, right? Because it always keeps one as primary. So if connection is still up, but it's crappy.
Yeah, exactly. And so the problem was that connectivity was not working when it was on the foreign side. And we started troubleshooting. And one of the first things that struck my mind is that it actually did not matter on which side the boat was, but we asked the customer to run a test. And you could see both networks from UK side and French side at a single time, right? Which was surprising because you're supposed to be, you're far away from the other side. So when you're in UK, you're like 30 kilometers from France. You're technically not supposed to receive that French network, right? But they did. And what we noticed a bit later is that it was sticking to that French network even on the UK side. It was never moving fully to the UK network, so it was never roaming correctly. So we did ask them for troubleshooting, but then the customer was like, yeah, but I cannot do it now because I need to wait for the boat to be at the port and on the side that it has connectivity, otherwise I cannot run any test. Of course, that made the troubleshooting a little bit more complicated, because you need to think about, okay, I need to wait for the boat to get the port on the right side. I need to ask command that can be run from there to show me the problem when it's on the other side. So of course you could think of scripting things, and we tried, but it's not always easy, especially that at the beginning you don't really know what to collect, right? You have a list of standard commands, but you quickly exhaust those and you'll need more advanced commands. But luckily we managed to do that with a couple of back and forth of the ferry. It was also not possible to run that at every single cycle of the ferry. So sometimes the ferry was like leaving almost right away. So it comes back, unloads, loads again, and then leaves without any stop at the port, any long stop. So during those intervals, we could not really collect anything because it was barely staying for an hour, and that's too short for us to collect anything. So we had to wait, like, for example, the night cycles that were a bit longer, where the ferry was staying for like 3 or 6 hours. So there we had a bit of spare time to do some collection. Well, actually, I say we, but it was mostly the customer. I was telling them, okay, collect these whenever you get the chance and give me the outputs. And they were doing that very diligently. It was actually a great collaboration from them. Until we figured out a couple of things. So first, the SIM card always preferred their home network. So they will always try to stick to the home network. So if it has a chance to stay on the home network, it will not roam. And well, it makes sense when you think about it, right? Because roaming can be costly for the provider, for the end user, and things like that. So that makes sense, right? But the second part was, how come can the boat or the LTE modem on that boat see the two networks at the same time from France and UK? And then we started investigating, and actually the answer is pretty obvious. It's not that far away, right? It's only
clear line of sight as well. It's pure outdoor, and apart from a
Yes.
bird, sometimes you have really nothing in between.
Exactly. And not just that, but the ferry being super tall, it's like 30, 40 meters tall.
You have a tower effect.
Exactly. It has really a very clean line of sight. Actually, you might have seen those pictures from people in France seeing the white cliffs of Dover from across the sea. Well, basically that was happening on the boat. And on clear days, you might have actually quite a good connection between the two. But on bad days, which happens quite a lot on between France and UK, where the weather is not that nice, you would not have good connection, but just barely enough signal to detect that your home network is here, but not able to connect to it.
From my Wi-Fi days, I remember that starting 7 kilometers of distance, you have the curvature of the Earth, and sorry for the flat earthers, that starts to take effect. So after 7 kilometers, you need to have a small of a tower, right? You need to raise your antenna height, and then already a few meters of height, and you're adding kilometers of range. So yeah, with a ferry that is like 30 meters high, I have no doubt that it carries much further.
Yeah, exactly. So what we realized is a couple of things. So we started putting workaround in place because the solution was not effective for the customer. So this was like a new type of installation, and they were not. They did some tests initially that appeared to work, but later on they figured out that depending on the weather, it will stop working and things like that. So what we started by putting some workaround in place. For example, scripting. We scripted some. Our listener might know the EEM script, so Event Manager scripting on iOS and iOS XE, right? Allows us to do a lot of cool things, right? One of the things that we did we know that when the problem is there, you will have no connectivity. So if you do an EEM that is based on a ping, whenever we have a lot of ping losses, for example, you lose ping to Google or to 8888 or whatever, whichever IP you want. If you lose that for like a minute, we might trigger a condition. And we decided that, okay, let's do this. So whenever we lose a ping for a given amount of time, we will run a command on the device to force sticking to one network. So we could tell to stick to the UK network, so we could force roaming, or we could force it to stick to the French network, and could force home network. So we were trying those, and we put scripts in place, which, by the way, required several back and forth of the ferry to to work because, of course, I cannot easily test in my lab. This is quite hard to test. I'm not close to any border. I have SIM cards that are fixed to one single provider, so I cannot easily test that. So really, I had the customer test that with us, I should say. And this worked eventually. So eventually, this was the solution that we decided to go for. So we put this workaround in place. And one of the other things that we thought about later on, maybe a bit too late in the process, but there was maybe an easier solution, is that we could have downgraded the antennas in a sense that the antennas that we had were long-range, high-gain antennas. But we actually don't really need that because the LTE connection is only needed when the boat is at the port. So close to probably a lot of mobile towers, right? So we could have downgraded to standard antennas or put attenuators on the antennas so that it would not pick the signal from across the sea as well, and probably would not even pick it up at all. And
you can calculate from a design perspective that it will naturally lose the coverage of the country it's leaving at the middle of the channel, and then quickly pick up the other signal from there, right? So you're kind of deciding where it will lose the signal of one and start getting the signal of the other. And here it was so good that you would always keep, even if very poor, the signal of the...
Exactly. And for them, it was not important to lose it when the boat's at sea, right? It was really not a problem. They did not expect connection in the middle of the sea. They only needed it at the port.
Yeah, you can lose it for 5 minutes in the middle of the sea.
Yeah, that would be fine, all right? That's it, right? And then we also found an interesting thing, is that we collected some, not really telemetry data, but some periodic data collection to see how the signal evolves when the boat crosses the sea. So we were running cellular history statistics, something like that, every few minutes. And we could see the signal quality for a given provider fluctuating. And at some point, it was fluctuating to a super good signal in the middle of the sea. Like something you could think that it must be close to a mobile antenna. Well, I mean, not super close, but close-ish, right? Much closer, much better signal than what it was when it was at the port, at least on one port. And we figured out that this was the place where it crossed the channel tunnel, so the one for the trains, because that one is covered by LTE signal all the way. There are antennas all the way. And
I thought about oil platform, but no, okay, the train.
Yeah, it was the train. So we could see that the signal was getting better when it was crossing it, going over the tunnel, and then decreasing again. But of course, not that much because it's still underwater and underground, so the signal quality is not excellent. But you could see like a blip going up in the graphs that we were drawing for this. It was quite funny.
It reminds me of the problematic of inside my house. I have very poor mobile phone coverage because the walls are attenuated. But sometimes it's going to stick if I'm like walking outside and then going in. My call was on the mobile network, and it's going to stick to the mobile network, even though signal is very terrible. And it could switch to Wi-Fi. And I'm like, I would want to tell it manually, hey, switch over to Wi-Fi now. But also the other way around. Sometimes I'm doing Wi-Fi calling from inside my house where it works well because I have a good Wi-Fi, obviously. Then I leave, I go in the garden or something, and then I would want it to switch seamlessly to the cellular network, but it can still pick up some of my Wi-Fi. And it thinks it's doing a good job by sticking to the Wi-Fi and save me some 4G data usage. But I'm like, no. Yeah. I would prefer now you switch, to be honest. So,
we need some clever AI to figure that out for us, please.
Yeah, or a configurable algorithm, right? The vendors typically try to make it transparent, but everyone has a different use case. So,
yeah, indeed, and that use case was actually fun. Yeah, I love the fact that we had to wait for the boat to be at the port to collect the data we need and things like that. That was a bit unusual, right?
It sounds like the typical realization from a young tech engineer. I don't know how young you were, but typically tech engineers, when they start their career, they ask for insane action plans, right? Get me this, get me that, get me this. Yeah. And so that customers are like, you know how hard this is to collect it, right? You're asking for stuff. It's not that straightforward to collect. And because we're so remote, it's like, yeah, sure, but just that's what we need. Please collect it. And then when you're in the field and you have to collect it, you're like, yeah, well, I'm gonna have to wait 2 days for the boat to show up, and then I hope it will not be in the middle of the night and I can onboard it. So I'll get back to you in a week. You just don't anticipate this.
Yeah, indeed. That's a very unusual scenario. Something we don't think about most of the time, because most of the time the device that we work with, they are fixed in a rack in a static building that doesn't move. But here was not the case. And I didn't have that many cases in that type of scenario. I have another one, but this was one of the few, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, what's your other one?
Yeah, the other one was a slightly different scenario, but still involving the same type of technology. So still LTE connection on boats. And here, this was for a water company, a river company or management company for the rivers that was testing autonomous boats on the rivers. They needed for that autonomous boat a very good LTE connection. Right. So here we're not on sea anymore. We are on the river across a country that's well covered in mobile network. And they needed very good coverage for video streaming, because that boat had lots of cameras that was streaming the video back to some type of a remote center. And the boat was also receiving commands from that remote center to take action on where to go and things like that. Right? So the LTE was really critical on this, and could not work without long interruption of LTE connection, right? And the customer was complaining that the LTE service on the modem on the boat was pretty poor. They were saying that they had frequent disconnection, as well as very slow throughput when the connection was there. So you could see they gave us like a speed test results, and you could see, let's say, less than 5 megabits per second, which was not enough for them because they needed much more. I think they told me they needed at least 30 to stream the video traffic correctly. And you could see below 5 megabits per second, and sometimes even losing the connection entirely. And they said, well, this must be something on the Cisco router, because I tested with my phone on the boat. So the engineer was on the boat itself, the same boat that had the problem. At the time, the problem was there. And they did speed test on their own phone, which was on the same provider network as the LTE modem on the Cisco router. And they had a much better connection, like 50 megabits per second, if not more. So they had perfect connection, no losses, no nothing. So we started scratching our heads, and what we could see from, well, basically the same command as in the previous story. So show cellular history, something like that. You could see that the signal quality was at that time pretty poor. So it was basically in the 1 bar range. If you look at your phone, you have this bar from 1 to 4, and it was like in the 1 bar range. Actually, the router itself has a small LED array with the number of bars that you get, and it was also showing 1 bar there.
The bars don't mean much to me. I prefer numbers, but yeah.
Yeah.
1 bar means you're not getting anything good happening. That's for sure.
Exactly. Well, you don't want to see 1 bar, right? Yeah. And the phone was, of course, at full 4 bars, and having we didn't have a good diagnostic data from the phone itself, because from phone manufacturers, it's not always easy depending on the brand. But you could see full 4 bars, and it was really good there, but not on the modem itself, on the Cisco router. So we started digging, and we were asking the standard question on signal quality. And then I had a bit of an idea. Well, first thing is in the logs of the router, you see you can debug the received signal strength per antenna, and the router was supposed to have 2 antennas, right? And you could see that 1 antenna was at the minimum level, so minus 130, which means no antenna is connected. And the other one was showing a bad signal. So it was showing like minus 110-ish something. So like really the 1 bar level type of signal. So first thing I told the customer was, well, it looks like you have 1 antenna connected only. So let's try with the second one. And see if it makes a difference, right? And they did tell me that they thought that the second antenna was only for the second SIM card that you could install on the router, and they said we only need one. I said no, it's actually shared, and it helps with diversity and all that, so it makes the signal quality better. It picks the best signal of the two, and it makes some crazy logic between, so that the signal is improved by having a second antenna, right? So they tried that, and they saw better results.
Cannot be worse.
Well, for sure, it wasn't worse. Right? It was better. It was not to the level of the phone, but it was better. Okay. And they said, well, technically, we could live with those levels. So the signal quality that they were getting allowed them to do the streaming and all the things that they needed. But they were still asking, how come my phone is much better than the Cisco router, which probably costs 10 times the price? So we kept on digging, and actually it didn't take that long. I asked them, I was a bit curious actually on those autonomous boat systems. So I asked them a picture of the installation that they had. And then things became quite clear. So they sent me a picture of the router inside a metal rack, inside a metal cupboard, inside a metal boat. So we could see from the picture of that customer, the bridge itself, so the control center of that boat, with a few windows, obviously, but mostly metal, with very small round windows, as you might have seen in movies and things like that, right? And the antennas were connected inside all of that Faraday cage. Actually, it was like almost Russian dolls of Faraday cages, making the signal quite poor. So one of the other things that we then asked them to do was to, let's try to put those long antenna extender, basically a cable that allows you to have several meters of flexibility in where you want to place your antennas. Right? Did that, put that on the roof of that boat. So the boat was not that tall, so it's not a ferry boat, right? It's just a small boat. Put that on the roof with a few meters of cable, and guess what? The signal quality was then perfect. They got the same thing as with their mobile phone, and they could do everything that they wanted to with this. But there, I found it was actually funny that having the picture was really the key moment in that investigation. Probably if I would have had the picture initially, I would have thought about that, but not initially, right? I mean, I'm not a sailor. I don't really have a good experience with boats. So yeah, I was not thinking about that. But then with the picture, it became quite obvious. Right?
They compared apple to oranges, because if they were inside the cupboard with the phone, they would also have had bad results.
Probably. I think that the cupboard was probably too small to hold the phone in. Like, it was a very small electrical cupboard. I think that we asked them to take the speed test with the phone next to the router, but it might have been outside of the first two Faraday cages, which probably helped a lot with the signal already. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was quite a funny story.
Interesting story. And I can see that it went pretty quick, because you had the speed of mind to think about, what could be the problem, ask pictures, and it could be resolved either with pictures or the right action plan. But what's funny is when you are still not able to resolve it, and then you have to go on site, right? Like, it's rare that we go on site, but what if you have to go on site and it's a boat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or something like that?
Yeah. No, it was cool. It was not that easy to get logs either, because the boat doesn't sail every day either. It was more like a project, like a pilot project. So they were having time slots on which they could use the boat and things like that. But yeah, still, it was one of these cases that was resolved by picture. And by the way, this would be a nice theme for another podcast. Cases resolved by pictures. I have a few others for those if you want. Later.
They're always funny. It's always a funny picture.
Yeah, indeed. Cool.
Let's get guests. So I asked Jaro, who's been on the boat, like I was saying. So please welcome Jaro.
Hello, Jaro.
Hello, Nika. Thank you for having me here again.
So you've been once to a cruise ship. We don't go often to remote sites, but then cruise ship is one in a lifetime experience. Can you tell us why you went to a cruise ship?
Absolutely. The life of tech engineer is full of interesting cases, but I guess some are more memorable than others. It's either because we solve some technical difficulties, right, or case has some big impact, or there are some unique circumstances associated with solving a case. And in my 12-year career, I also have such a unique case related with traveling. And actually not just traveling, taking part in a voyage across Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah, so it was on a cruise ship stopped or under construction. It was a live one. Okay. So
Right.
how did it start?
Yeah, so it all started during actually the construction of the new ship, when the TAC team received information or received actually service request with the information that the onboard network is experiencing some occasional unexplained issues. And at the beginning, we thought that maybe it's something that has to do with different systems being activated. The whole construction is something that does not happen overnight. It's a process that happen over multiple weeks, if not months. And when we first received such information, we didn't have a lot of information. We just had some general symptoms that network experience a general network meltdown with some good indication that most likely it was a layer 2 loop. And of course, no data was collected. The core switches were reloaded, restarted, and after the restart, everything started to work fine. And the network continued to work fine for next couple of weeks. Ship went through various acceptance tests until the moment when actually ship had to go for some test voyage. And while being in the middle of the sea, another network meltdown happened. And it was really serious situation to the degree that actually the captain lost the communication with the engineering room and had to return back to the port in, I would say, in kind of emergency mode with the assistance of the Coast Guard. So it was.
So we're not talking about the convenience RJ45 port in your bedroom. We're not talking about that. It's really like the switches that were running the boat itself.
Right. I think I don't recall exactly whether it was just some general communication system or the captain lost the entire steering capabilities. I'm not sure of these details, but I know that ship had some special procedure for such a situation, so the ship managed to return safely back to port. But
I guess they have failback systems, but anyway, if one system is not working, they have to go back to the port. Makes sense. It's a safety measure.
Right. And that time the situation became really serious, and it was also additional data point for us because we knew that something that we blamed before did not had a chance to occur. I mean, there was no new systems being installed at that time when this network meltdown happened.
Maybe someone by surprise came with a cable and plugged and created a loop, and that then was hiding, but no.
Yeah, I think it was very unlikely, and at that time we started to brainstorm. I mean, the Cisco team, the TAC team working at the case, started to brainstorm and think, explore certain hypotheses and compared what could happen, and also review all the network configuration, review all the safety mechanisms that should prevent the network from such a situation, and as a result of this review, we came to the point, the TAC team came to the point that this network design has been used on board of many other ships. And the only difference between this ship and the other ships is a new type of switches that were used here. And this was the first time when Catalyst 3850 in Slackwise virtual setup has been used, and all other ships at that time were based on Catalyst 6880. So as a consequence of this conclusion, because we didn't have exact data what was going on, I think it was the team took a decision to perform a swap, replace the 3850 switches with something that was already proven, established, and we knew it was working fine without any issues on other ships.
It's kind of an aggressive decision, right? But
it was a very aggressive decision, but you can imagine that you cannot establish a WebEx session and troubleshoot network meltdown on a ship that is assisted by the Coast Guard, right? So we had to kind of calculate all the risks and based on this, take decision that gives the highest chance of fixing the problem.
I think it made sense because there was an established design with the Cat 6K and they had the config and everything ready, right? Otherwise, it would make less sense. But here it's like, yeah, okay. It could be either one of the new feature of 3850, a bug on 3850, like it's whatever, but they just want to revert back to what they know was working fine.
Yep. This was the network design was fairly standard. Everything was tested, verified. The only difference between this design and the other designs was this new platform, which at that time, I know that right now Catalyst 3850 looks like something old, but at that time it was a brand new platform, and especially the stackwise virtual mode. It was something new.
So stackwise virtual is when you have a stack of switches, but they're not necessarily directly on top of each other, right?
Correct. It's the ability to combine two units, two physical units, to act as one logical unit using the front panel ports.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and at that time, a decision was taken to replace 12 sets of redundant 3850 switches. And replace them with 6880.
Does that make 24 3850s, or you had more redundancy than that?
Actually, it was one-to-one swap. So one 3850 switch had to be replaced with one 6880.
It's much
24 switches to replace totally.
But it's much bigger. The Cat 6K is much bigger than the 3850, right?
Well, that was I would say the main difficulty. The swap by itself was fairly standard operational, but the biggest challenges that we've experienced was with the differences in form factor. The 3850 is one rack unit, where the 6880 is actually 4U. So it's a way bigger switch, and the radiating cables, making sure that everything looks nice and tidy and is well arranged around the platform. I would say that was a main challenge.
And that's when they told you, "Hey, Yaro, what are you doing on Friday?" Right?
Yeah, actually, it all started. I wasn't involved in the case at the beginning. At a certain point of time, I was sitting at my desk, and in the morning, I got a call from our director asking, Yaro, what would you say about the business trip and spending a week on the cruise ship voyaging around Mediterranean Sea?
An offer you can't refuse.
That's if you stage the question in this way, it's an offer that you cannot really refuse. And yeah, it was. I said, yeah, sure, why not? And then I actually find out that because the ship was already scheduled for commercial voyages, we have to do because it was me together with one more colleague from a tag team, we had to do the swap of these switches while being on board, while traveling through and voyaging during the commercial trip. So our goal was not to sink the ship.
Because they had no time to stay stopped for you to do the swap, right? They had to do this trip.
The costs of operating the ship and all the tickets that were already sold prior to the swap, we managed to kind of guarantee that the network will be stable and the chances for the loop to reoccur to happen, to eliminate such a chance by shutting down one of the redundant nodes. So when we took this decision, we knew that since we've eliminated the physical possibility for the loop, the network will be stable. But of course, it was for the price of redundancy. So that bought us some time, and we were fairly confident the network will be stable. But of course, all these swaps have to be done with the extra cautious, and we had to be very, very careful.
Changing switch live in a boat that is using them, like that's insane pressure. I don't know.
Yeah, the routine we've done these swaps over several nights. Of course, you cannot swap 24 switches, in one night. So we had the schedule prescribed, spread across several nights, and the typical routine for us was that we were starting the prep work around 8 p.m. and then at 12, straight at the midnight, we were allowed to introduce some network down. And then everything had to be up at 3 a.m. And starting from 3 a.m. till 6, we're monitoring, making sure that all the changes that we've introduced, are working fine as expected, and there are no unexpected consequences of this swap. And I also remember one interesting thing that we, of course, worked together with the local IT officers that were responsible. They were on board and they were responsible for this whole network infrastructure to function properly. And they were super friendly, super relaxed for most of the time, except one night. And when we had to disable the network in the ship's casino, they were counting every minute of a network unavailability. Since, as it later turned out, each minute of a network down in casino meant serious money being lost. So from my perspective, it looked like casino LAN was the most critical network system on board, even more important than the part of the network that was responsible for connectivity between the mission control center and the engineering.
Business impact is never where you suspect it will be. You always have to ask, because for everyone it's different.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And we managed to complete the swap on time. Unfortunately, out of the entire Mediterranean voyage, I could only enjoy one day, as we were working through all other evenings and nights. And as I mentioned, the typical work was done during a night, and we used the day to recover. It was like day after day.
Sleeping in the day, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was super interesting experience. Very unique environment. Typically when you think about the switches, what comes to your mind is some office, some buildings, and here we could see how networking system, how LAN network is being used on board of the cruise ship.
What I will remember here is that there is such a job as network engineer on board of a cruise ship, because you said you had IT there on the ship. So that's maybe a career opportunity that is worth looking into.
Actually, all these local IT officers, they had some ranks assigned. So I think they were like going through the career path slightly different than what the typical IT engineers are going through. But you have the position of IT network officer on board of the cruise ship.
If you're an IT network officer on board of a cruise ship and you're listening to this, please contact us on Twitter or whatever. We want to hear more about it. Sounds like an interesting job. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Jaro, for your story. Next time you have a crazy story, you know who to knock. We'll be happy to have you again.
All right, thank you very much.
And now we can welcome our other guest. We have Maren with us. Hello, Maren.
Hello, Maren.
Hello, team. Great to be here. It's my first podcast, actually. So my name is Maren Kostede. I'm a solutions engineer in Cisco. I work in the sales side of the team. And my job's a bit unique, I guess, in EMEA, because I'm kind of the one SE bridging between field sales and BE. And I also get looped into key customer projects. And I guess that's how I also end up sometimes on a cruise ship.
So you're sales, but you're also technical to a degree, right?
Yes, I've been an engineer all my Cisco life.
We only welcome engineers here. Managers are not welcome, so that's good. So I remember a few years back we were discussing, and you said you had to go on a cruise ship. So this is basically why we asked you to come. Can you tell us about that time?
Yes. So cruise ships, I think, if you think of it as a customer, they are like very large, closed buildings. And they have everything that maybe a shopping mall would have, sometimes a hospital would have. And it's all on one big thing. And I guess what is unique is that you cannot just go, but you have to wait for them to be in shore. And in fact, what's also unique is that most of the time there is lots of customers on it. So touching a ship and actually doing proof of concepts or troubleshooting is not super easy. There's always very short windows only where you can access the boats.
And if I recall, you had to get on board at a certain time, right? Like you could not plan your visits whenever you wanted.
Yes, absolutely. I guess it does require maximum flexibility. So I recall one instance. So I live in Hamburg, and we have a harbor here. So I got looped in once with a retrofit. So this was a ship that was in the dock, but with all the time constraints, it actually turned out that the window was so short because I could only just either like stay on the ship or and then basically go on the short cruise for the next destination or leave like within 2 hours, because basically they were remodeling the boat, taking it to the next destination for the cruise guests to come on board.
Okay, and if I remember, it was somewhat of a vague problem as usual, right? Like you had to just get on board and see what was up with the design and just give your opinion, right, on what was going well or not. So I know you shared pictures that you were testing the Wi-Fi here and there and just checking around. How did it go?
Yeah, so the reason I got looped in is because first of all there was only this very short window of opportunity, and everyone was laser focused to get the wireless upgrades all done, upgrade the infrastructure, ensure that the software upgrades go smoothly. And they basically wanted quick access to a Cisco business unit, to Cisco TAG with a Cisco representative. And yeah, so this was the situation. And there was quite a few things that I felt were different than with normal customers. For example, I remember we were optimizing the network in the on shore. That was all fine, but once the ship left the harbor, suddenly we could not just change a power profile on a wireless LAN controller, because this would require the captain's approval, because suddenly he's in charge of the whole network. So you cannot touch a thing without getting the captain's approval, which probably didn't know too much about wireless controllers, but he's in charge of everything that's happening on the boat. So that was very unique. And I guess there was no need for us to explain to him what we were doing. It's just like, okay, now that's a maintenance thing. We need approval. That was
So
very
this means that everything that you were doing required the captain's approval, so you couldn't do anything while the ship was cruising. Is that right?
Yes, to any scenario of troubleshooting, that makes it extra tricky, right?
Mm-hmm. Especially if you have a problem that happens during cruising, you cannot solve it anytime then. Until
I don't think it
support.
For sure is not going to be as easy because you need to clearly see what it is. I guess if it's about like doing some captures, that would be possible, but changing settings, you need to be really careful. Yeah,
It's funny because you're as an engineer, you're like, I'm just going to change this, it's not going to bring anything down, like it's a safe change, it's just a detail, but you still need to ask the captain, and the captain is like, what are you talking to me about? Like, what is this? Like, what do I know about Wi-Fi?
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt as well.
And we heard from Jaro that they were using a lot of switching for every part of the boat and the engine room and communications and everything, but you were on the wireless side, right? So can you tell us about what was Wi-Fi used for in each room?
So while you mentioned each room, that's almost like a keyword, because in fact, to have Wi-Fi on a ship, you pretty much have an access point in each room, because the ship, you may not see it because it looks like wood, but most of the ships are actually made from metal. So they're very thin walls with like zigzag metal inside, which means there's limited signal that goes through. So in many ships, we actually do see like one access point per room. It could be just a wall plate access point. In fact, in the quite common, I've seen this in hotels as well. The AP would just sit behind the TV. It's a wall plate that has several ports and it does Wi-Fi. So that's one way they've been doing it. The main use case, there's several. There's the use case for the crew. So the crew uses it for communication. They've actually been also using wireless phones for that. And then for the cruise, well, I guess the cruise tourists, they use it for accessing any resources that are on the ship. So it can be internet, but internet is super expensive. So many resources are also on the web online. The TV is connected. They have films that are like hosted on the ship directly for all the guests to feel almost like they are in this big small village on its own.
It's a bit like on a plane, basically, right? So the Wi-Fi gives you a local service, like you can stream movies from the plane or the boat itself. No real internet access, as you said. But what I'm surprised is that it also have like a critical function here, like the crew members using it for critical communication, I assume. So it means that, you can't really afford to have any downtime.
So critical. I'm not sure, but essentially in a cruise ship, I think it may all be critical when the staff speaks with one another, if they need to connect to a kitchen, hospital. So the whole crew communication would be on wireless phones, and there's also little understanding for hiccups, of course. Which is another instance where I got pulled in because they actually did observe some hiccups with wireless telephony. And troubleshooting this, as you may all know, is not super easy. So I spent quite a few hours to have conversations over wireless phones, walking the ship, trying to identify where the problems are happening and then ensuring that we're taking the proper captures and so forth. And this was all in a dry dock, however. So that's another scenario, but you have a very short window of time. So maybe it's just a week. So I would very much encourage everyone who does it to make very good plans beforehand. So, don't go on site and think of what you're going to do, but make all the plans, what you're going to do, make a plan, the scenarios, and then execute on it, because your window of opportunity to do it is very short.
And then it requires a lot of preparation, right? Because not only you need to think on what you will do, but think of backup plans and things like that. Because if step 2 in the plan doesn't work, then what do you do, right? So you need to make sure you have several backup plans.
I guess in some cases, I remember the backup plan is also maybe happening as we go. I remember one situation, there was actually an ask if an engineer from the partner side could kind of continue on the cruise for another week. I mean, that may sound attractive, but the engineers usually don't get the window rooms, and it's also a very long working hours. But for sure, it's a fun environment. I would always do it again. But yeah, I mean, suddenly you end up on a cruise for a week. That doesn't always work for everyone.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, I'm just thinking about it, but how big are those boats? Like, how many rooms, how many people can they host?
Well, there's obviously various ships. I don't recall the exact number, but I'd say it's probably 5,000 people. And what may be even more interesting, I've just looked up some of my notes here, but the boat I was on had 18 floors. So
18.
Yes, because it doesn't just go, it's like above the water and underneath. So it is a huge building.
So how many? So 5,000 people or so. So how many room would that be? Like 2,000, something like that.
Yeah, usually half is the crew and half is the passengers. Yeah.
Wow, that's huge. And one access point per room. This must be a hell of a site survey.
Well, actually, I was going to say no, right? Because a room is easy to cover. It's so small, like you don't care too much, right? The AP is behind the TV, and that's good enough.
I was going to say the rooms are fairly easy, but just in terms of expectation, what I had noticed, for example, the room was fine, but when I went on the balcony, so that's like you can see the access point, but the doors, they have super high attenuation. They're usually coated. So I'd say 20 plus dBm. So even though you try what you can, you may still end up with limited Wi-Fi on the balcony, and because it's not maybe covered with the room. The more tricky parts are actually the atriums. So if you've ever seen a cruise ship or you picture one, it's also multi-story openings. And then you want access points, but ideally, maybe you don't want them super visible. So multiple challenges also with the mounting sometimes.
And it's going to be a crazy design, combining guest services, combining critical services, design, aesthetics. All in all must be a tough one.
I'm thinking of all the infrastructure that you need as well for this, because you think about the access point, but then how many racks of switches do you need in the in the back to support all of that, and then the routers, and then everything else, and that still need to fit in a boat with the power envelope of a boat, which I guess is huge, right?
And to complicate your image of that design, there's also different fire sections on a boat. So usually you don't just have one core, but you have multiple, and you have sophisticated failover mechanism in case something goes wrong in one end. The other end needs to be completely autonomous. So it can be quite tricky, yes.
Wow. Just 5,000 rooms multiply 5,000 access points. So that's 5,000 switchboards just for the access points.
Yeah.
Plus all the rest. And you mentioned something briefly, that it's an access point with switchboards that is behind the TV. So why do you have more switchboards on the access point that is in the room?
So for the rooms, first of all, it's easier to provide connectivity to multiple systems. The eagerness to have a connected TV, sometimes, or in most cases, they would also connect a phone to it. And then I guess there's also an option to potentially connect a user's device. But even if it's only 2 or 3 ports, it makes it easier for the setup, I guess, if they just have that in each room. And they're also pretty slick and fit behind the TV, because you have the wall mounting, and then the TV needs a cable anyway, so everything is kind of in one place. So that's
it's like a tiny switch in the AP, right? And you can plug your phone, your TV, and a few stuff behind it. Nice. And that becomes critical services as well, because if the TV behind the AP is not working, people will complain very quickly if they bought a ticket for a cruise ship and there's no TV. I guess that's a problem too. Okay. What would be the closing word, the most difficult part of the cruise ship design, the experience for you?
I'd say the most difficult is sometimes the aesthetics. Indeed, I recall a scenario where the crew didn't know anymore what the AP was, which, by the way, is also a reason where I see using maps, like putting access points on maps with a management system, makes a lot of sense, because it helps you quickly identify where each access point is. And even though aesthetics matter, I get it, but wireless is never for life. So every few years, there is an exciting new Wi-Fi technology. And maybe you don't want to hide your AP too much, because you may have to touch it and have to do an upgrade. And it's just easier if they are visible. And I find our APs pretty slick. So that's my sales head now.
For sure, the boat has a longer lifetime than the AP. So yeah, that sounds like it's true.
Hopefully.
Well, thanks a lot for coming, Maren. It was a pleasure to have you on our cruise ship special episode.
Thank you, Maren.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Don't forget to subscribe and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, or any other platform. And we're thinking about doing a Q&A episode, right, Tristan? If people have questions, either a request for a specific guest or questions about specific deployment protocols or whatever. So hit us up on Twitter, now called X, right? The account is Cisco Tech Story. Hit us up with any question and we'll collect them until we do a special episode of the Q&A.
Yeah, that would be a fun one, I'm sure.
And see you next month for our next episode.
See you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast. You can subscribe to us on Cisco Podcast Network in SoundCloud or in your favorite podcasting app. You can also find us on X at Cisco Tech Story without S. Thanks again for listening and speak to you next month.
On the deck, feel the breeze. Blue waves roll with ease. Connected in the sun. Wi-Fi makes it more fun. Ocean views all around. Signal strong, I have found. Email pings at sea. Stream my tunes, feel so free. Internet on the cruise. Never gonna lose. Stay in touch all day. Wi-Fi in the bay. Under stars, I can browse. Send my love, my vows. Surfing like a king. In the sea, we sing. Under stars, I can browse. Send my love, my vows. Surfing like a king. In the sea, we sing. Internet on the cruise. Never gonna lose. Stay in touch all day. Wi-Fi in the bay. Sailing far so wide with my Wi-Fi guide. Feel the island vibe, connected